Hi, good evening. Everybody can hear me okay. Welcome. We're so glad to see everyone. I'm Dr. Katie Morrison, and I'm happy to welcome you all to our Friends of Cooper Island annual update. I've worked with George on collaborative outreach projects over the past 16 years, and I'm currently the board chair for Friends of Cooper Island. 2 years ago, we had to cancel this yearly event right at the start of the pandemic. Last year, George and I were lucky to attend this event here in person in Town Hall, but it was just George and I upstairs with the film crew while Town Hall streamed the presentation to viewers across the country. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with George and also with Maria Coryell-Martin and all of you for the Friends of Cooper Island annual update, marking 47 years of research in the Alaskan Arctic. It's so exciting to have this presentation both in person with all of you and streaming to viewers at home. Tonight's presentation, you'll hear from all three of us. Sorry, I'm just gonna make this. George will tell us about his recent field seasons and discoveries from his analyses. Maria and I will share stories from our 2019 trip to Cooper Island, as well as our outreach efforts through art and education. And then George will close with a discussion of some of the broader implications of the Cooper Island research. After that, we'll take both in-person and online questions and comments. If you are viewing remotely, you can enter your comments or questions at any time. Someone's monitoring the chat, and then we'll do questions at the end. Great, so, the next slide, sorry.
There's a buffer.
There's a buffer, okay, great, perfect. Okay, and then now, George DeVoe.
Thanks very much, Katie. This is actually, even though it's the 47th year of the Cooper Island study, this is the 50th year. It's the 50th anniversary of my finding the colony in 1972. But I didn't really get into it until 1975. I'm so thankful that you've all been able to come out here tonight. It's been a strange 2 years for everyone. And I'm thinking, and we were thinking, as I was thinking about this, I think, okay, this is basically the rehearsal for the 2023 event, because then we'll have it down. Anyone who's been concerned about climate change has almost certainly seen the movie Don't Look Up, where there is this analogy or a metaphor for an existential threat that humans don't really want to see or address, even though it clearly is something that is very important. And it's an interesting thing with the reviews of that film. Movie critics don't like it because of some artistic things and things like that. Audiences tend to like it, but people who are climate change scientists think it is spot on, because they know what it's like to find something out that you think, hey, this could be really important, and then kind of like, oh yes, it might be, but, and then things just move on. My study, the Cooper Island study, became known in 2002 when Joe McNally and Darcy Frey did a piece for the New York Times Magazine that many people read, and people still say to me, this is the first time I really thought about climate change, when they read this in January 2002. And it was watching the world melt away. Now, Don't Look Up is based on a idiosyncratic Rust Belt researcher who doesn't comb his hair much from Michigan State University, who basically found something that he thought was very important to tell people, and then had to go on TV when people were talking about things like a rock star and his spouse or whoever breaking up and things like that. I was a somewhat idiosyncratic researcher in 1972 who had just left Michigan State University, and I found something that I thought was kind of important, that essentially the world was melting away, and that there was a process that was going on that if it was not reversed, was going to result in the loss of Arctic ice and snow. And I got a great deal of attention initially from people who said, "Oh yes, let's have this be known," and that kept up for a while. And I certainly made many connections through that are still ongoing that have been very helpful in terms of getting out the word. But mainly, what that let me do is start a nonprofit that focused on Arctic climate change and how an Arctic seabird was responding to climate change. And so that basically this thing tonight is a result of having that media attention, and I thank you all for coming, and especially for those people who've been to a number of these events. It means a great deal to me. We have a new website that is going to be coming up soon. I mean, our like old website wasn't bad, but it was definitely it like started in 2003. So I mean, there have been some advances apparently in. Since then. And also, one thing I realized, and this is kind of important to think about, is that Friends of Cooper Island is the nonprofit, and it supports Cooper Island Arctic research. And I've been able to, when I publish things now or when I apply for grants, I do so under the scientific arm of Friends of Cooper Island, which is Cooper Island Arctic Research. So I kind of quickly, though I think with this crowd you might have heard much of this, but basically you probably know that like I was meant to do a survey of the offshore islands in the early 1970s. I visited many of the islands off northern Alaska. Cooper Island was one of them. I found black guillemots breeding on Cooper Island, and they had not been found breeding in the Beaufort Sea prior to that time, and actually their presence there was almost certainly a sign of changing climate in that the snow-free window in the summer was now long enough to let them breed in these boxes. Black guillemots were a cavity nester. There were 10 pairs in 72. When I found the colony, I created more colonies, and this was the first nest I created that birds then moved into. The Coast Guard was flying me in and out, and we have a Coast Guard helicopter pilot here tonight. So I'm very indebted to Coast Guard helicopter pilots for both this and also saving my life. And so like what I did, which seemed natural at the time, is like, okay, I see what they need. I'm just going to turn over boxes or turn over floorboards, set these boxes up so that they are nest cases. And I then created, because I went back in 1975, over 200 nest sites for black guillemots to breed in. It became one of the least attractive seabird colonies in the state of Alaska. But I had access to all of the nest contents. And usually if you're studying seabirds, they're up on a rocky cliff or they're back in a talus or scree slope. And being able to actually have access to adults, chicks, eggs throughout the whole breeding season was something I realized was important. And that's why I did it. I didn't think there was anything inherently good about having more guillemots in the Arctic. We had them breed in those wooden sites until I realized that there were things like polar bears and puffins that could too easily access the same sites I had access to. So we then replaced all of the nest sites with these plastic nest cases. So Manse black guillemot is a high Arctic seabird. It's in the same family as puffins, and they are rather special. And I really didn't even know this when I started. Is that they are an ice obligate species. They are They feed almost exclusively on Arctic cod for their whole life cycle. Arctic cod are a fish that's found directly under the ice. And it is one of the few, there's only probably two, ivory gull and Manse black guillemot, two seabird species that are tied to the ice edge, whereas the Antarctic has a lot of ice-adapted species. And black guillemots are a great species to study because you can handle them, and they don't abandon their nest. You then get to know everybody in the colony because then you can band them and give them 3 color bands so you can read their color bands and know who they are as individuals. And we've been able to do this since 1975. So we have 7 generations of birds because we know who is the parent of a bird when it comes back, and then after that bird comes back and breeds, we know who its offspring are. And it is tied to the ice edge, and it is very important that the ice edge be close by because it has a rather long breeding season for an Arctic seabird. After it lays the eggs, it incubates them for 28 days, and it takes 16 days to form the eggs. Then the chick is in the nest for roughly 35 days. going from roughly 35 grams to 350 grams. So it's a 10-fold increase. And they have an 80-day nesting period, so that during this very critical time of the year for them, their sea ice needs to be close by in order for them to breed successfully. They are one of the few, as I said, one of the few bird members of the cryopelagic system, which is fed by under ice algae and phytoplankton directly under the ice. And Arctic cod are basically the primary forage fish. Arctic Arctic ecosystems are known for their low diversity. And basically, it's just like lemmings on the tundra. You basically have lemmings and everything eats lemmings. When you get to the ocean, you have Arctic cod and everything eats Arctic cod. So one of the problems with being ice adapted, and this is a grab from a New York Times thing this past week. It was a book review about the Arctic, and they headed it up with the land of ice and snow, and that is what the Arctic is. So what's important is that in a temperature change from 28 degrees Fahrenheit to 35 degrees, water goes through a phase change. And that if you have that sort of thing taking place in the Arctic, you have melting, or if it's going the other way, you can have ice forming. Here in Seattle the other day, it might have been like 36 degrees, and it might have gone up to 44 degrees. No one really notices that because water isn't going through a phase change when that happens. So it turns out, and of course I had no way of knowing this, and I actually, my work out there predates the satellite era, so like many of the things we can find out about what's going on started being monitored very, very, very much after I got there. Cooper Island is in a place that is warming very, very rapidly. I mean, when you see that level of warming, and then you realize there are snow and ice habitats there, being very sensitive to that warming, and the whole state of Alaska is warming a great deal. And it is something that when you look at Southeast and the Aleutians and you go, oh, gee, things aren't bad there, because they aren't bad because of what's happening in the Arctic, because things are, to be honest, really bad in the Arctic. And of course, Southeast, of course, it has glaciers and things like that. They aren't dominated by snow and ice habitats the way that the Arctic is. So what this has meant is there has been this decrease in ice cover off of Utqiagvik, which is just 35 miles west of Cooper Island, in September, so that the ice is gone. And during the course of my study, you can see what happened. The ice used to be there, and now it's just not there anymore. And this shows what happened in 2 different years. Ice used to be directly offshore. We didn't have to take fresh water out to Cooper Island because multi-year ice can be drinkable, and we would just melt multi-year ice. We can't do that anymore because the ice is that far offshore now. So that means that we now have to melt snow and take water out with us. But more importantly, it's taking the cryopelagic ecosystem away from the birds on Cooper Island. And what that melt means, and this is important about Arctic amplification, is that and I remember vividly when I heard this stat for the first time, is that sea ice is one of the best things for reflecting solar radiation back into the atmosphere, and the ocean is one of the best things for absorbing it. So that once you get that ice loss, I mean, this has happened directly north of Cooper during my study there, it used to be all white to the horizon, and now it's all water to the horizon, which means that the solar radiation coming in is being absorbed, which means that the sea surface temperature is increasing. And this affects other marine organisms that aren't even part of the cryopelagic system, but just have a thermal tolerance for Arctic or subarctic temperatures that are now being exceeded. And it's important, and I think it is important to think that this is a story about seabirds on one island in Arctic Alaska, but it's actually a study about global warming. And that it's something we can talk about and something that I've documented in the situation. But prior to my study, there wasn't any global warming. I mean, in the period up until 1975, things weren't warming anywhere in the world rapidly. And for the period of my study, warming is basically occurring everywhere. And guillemots are responding to that, but there are almost certainly, and now you can see it with weather patterns and things like that, or even just with the heat waves that we've had, that things are being affected in lots of lower latitudes and not just the Arctic. So it's important to realize this is an Arctic talk, but it's basically a global talk in terms of climate change. So in terms of the guillemots breeding on Cooper, they get there in June when the ice surrounds the island. The eggs hatch in mid-July, just as the ice starts to break up a little bit. And then in August, you then have the ice pulling offshore a little bit, and it used to pull off maybe a mile or so, and now it can pull off like 150 miles or so. And what this means for the birds that are trying to raise their young is that during the period of the greatest energetic demands, when they are having to basically feed themselves, the parent birds have to feed themselves and provide enough fish for their two young to go through a tenfold increase in weight over a 35-day period, that the ice is and the cod is being pulled away. And one of the things about guillemots is that they, unlike many seabirds that can go offshore, eat lots of things, and come back and regurgitate that to their young, guillemots bring one fish back at a time. So, and they have two young there, so they have a very short foraging range. It turns out that they don't typically forage more than 5 kilometers, maybe 3 or 4 miles from the colony, so that Arctic cod have to be very close by for that to happen. What has happened as the ice is pulled offshore is that the parent birds turn to an alternate prey, mainly four-horned sculpin, which the chicks don't even like much, and then they basically reject them as in this thing on the lower right, or they eat them, and then that bony cartilaginous head sits there in the stomach for an hour or two, so they can't eat anything else. It turns out calorically, sculpin aren't that bad, but it's just a flow through. As the ice is melted, and again, those of you who've been to these things before know this, but this is one of the other things that has hurt the colony as climate change has occurred, is that there have been two species that have had range shifts. Polar bears have come south as their habitat has melted north of Cooper Island, and horned puffins have come north as the Arctic becomes more subarctic, and horned puffins are a subarctic species. They were doing major damage to the nestlings on Cooper Island as a result of climate change. I mean, these were birds that probably were also not being fed well because of the ice retreating, but you can see the sort of damage that they could do through time, which is why we then put out the bear-proof cases, which now means that the bears have much less of an impact. And as I've mentioned before, that when you fly over the island, it looks like a Samsonite luggage truck has exploded somewhere on the island because there's 225 black suitcases on the island. So one of the big news things, which I haven't been able to share with my Seattle people here, is that during the pandemic, and this was one benefit of the pandemic, there was a request from the North Pacific Research Board, which has some funds that the federal government obtained rather interestingly from the state of Alaska, which they decided to spend on marine resources. And they said, we don't know anything about Arctic cod. Anyone who might have something about that, please let us know what you might be able to do. And what we basically did is, I have a lot of data. I've been gathering data since 1975, and I said, I've been studying a species that specializes on Arctic cod since 1975, and I've been seeing what's been going on with its population and its feeding and things like that. I could provide that data, and I may not be the best analyst, but I know good analysts. And it's who you know is just as important as many of you know, as what you know. And I was able to have some excellent French collaborators come in on the proposal, some excellent Canadian collaborators come in on the proposal, and we are now, and unfortunately I didn't label Aaron Brown and Thomas Leister, who are two students who have been out to Cooper and have done very good work out there for me. And it has been great working with these people with the data sets. So now people have said, hey, what's going on with the colony? Okay. You can see it's not good. We had this rapid growth that took place because I built the nest sites, but then there was an atmospheric thing that happened. There was extreme Arctic oscillation, which has to do with high pressure systems and low pressure systems being wavering back and forth in terms of their position over the pole or over lower latitudes. And that started a different circulation in the Arctic that had multi-year ice being transported out of the Arctic, had the thicker ice being moved out, and as a result started this change in ice conditions, because if the ice was just responding to thermal stresses, it would be rather linear, because basically much of what's been going on with CO2 emissions has been rather linear. This shows that in a certain region, you can have very different responses to global warming. And what we saw was that basically the ice was, for a range of reasons, because of the prey not being available, the puffins and the polar bears. Things were great for guillemots up until 1989-90, and then really went bad. So one of the important things that the modelers first did is there were 4 periods that were identified. There was a rapid growth period, there was then the decline, there was kind of a stable period with a small plateau, and then there's the current ongoing decline. They modeled, and if you're into modeling, you may be able to see this, or if you're colorblind, you won't be able to tell anything about this. But what they recognized, or what we looked at, was both the environmental and the demographic characteristics that were driving growth during a different period. And what was clear is that immigration was the thing that was changing. I mean, immigration, when the colony was growing, it was clear that had to be the thing that was pushing it. But during the period of decline, immigration fell down. It kind of came back up a little bit during the plateau, and now immigration is down again. So in most colonies, you would have no idea of being able to even have that insight, but we have it because we have banded all of the fledglings, and I'm using the royal we there. We have banded all the fledglings since 1975, so that if a bird comes back as an adult and it has one of our bands on, we know it's one of our birds, and also we probably know its parents, and like we knew it when it was an egg. So like, yeah, we know a great deal about it. If a bird comes in and doesn't have a band, we know it's an immigrant. And that gives us an amazing ability to actually know by year what the composition of the colony is in terms of immigrants and locals, which, to be honest, I mean, it's something now I kind of take for granted because that's what we did. And also, it was even more than that. There were more immigrants coming in who were floaters, who couldn't even breed. So what we realized is like, okay, there are lots of birds coming in from someplace, but we didn't know where, and we certainly knew that where the colonies were in the Western Arctic, and we knew that there weren't many in Alaska. Basically, the Cooper Island colony was the biggest colony in Alaska. But we knew that Harold and Wrangel Island, which have big rocky cliffs, hundreds of feet high, and they have talus and scree and real rock cliffs and space for seabirds to breed, those were the likely places. And only recently did a publication that was not in the literature but was in a report come out, which indicated that there were, in the 1980s, 60,000, an estimated 60,000 black guillemots breeding on Harold and Wrangel Island. So it was like, oh my gosh, that changes everything. I mean, and this really was a paradigm. It was a major paradigm shift for me. I thought, oh my God, that means that essentially I've been studying one of the smallest colonies in the Western Arctic, and essentially it would be as if somebody was in Puget Sound and came up on Kingston, which has a population of around 2,000 people, did a 45-year study of the people in Kingston and what they were doing and who they were seeing if their young were coming back and things, what they were feeding on. And then somebody came up to him someday and said, oh, by the way, have you heard about Seattle? So like, I mean, it was similar to that. It was like, so basically it is King County, it's, or at least it was King County. Because what we realized is like, with the drop in the population, it means that the hose that was bringing in the immigrants has been somewhat shut down, and that we know that the loss of Arctic cod is what has shut down Cooper Island from being a colony where birds can breed successfully. So we know that with these temperature changes that are occurring, that Arctic cod drop out at roughly 2 degrees, and then four-horned sculpin are most common at over 3.5 degrees. And that parent birds are feeding within 5 kilometers of the colony, and diving around 20 meters, which isn't very deep for a seabird, and the amount of time that the parent birds on Cooper are spending underwater as the temperature warms is increasing greatly. I mean, you can see what happened in 2017. I mean, parent birds are working very hard to try to find fish, and probably most importantly, it isn't even working for them because chicks are still dying. So what we realized is that the Herschel Island colony over in Canada had basically the same arc as the Cooper Island colony did, And we looked at the conditions on Cooper Island with two metrics. One, when sea ice got down to 15 degrees, or 15% concentration, and when the temperature exceeded 3.4, and saw that, yes, there's been this trend that shows things are going downhill for birds breeding on Cooper Island. So we said, okay, no one's been censusing Herald Island, but we know what's been driving populations on Cooper. So we looked at Herald Island, and it's been having the same sort of thing. Conditions are going down there also. So there certainly aren't 60,000 birds there, and that is evident by the fact that we haven't seen them. And what's clear now, looking at where the ice is retreating, is that if you see the decadal changes on the lower part of the screen, is that all of the Western Arctic colonies of Manx Black Guillemots are losing their ice, and as a result, almost all the colonies are going through the same thing that the Cooper Island colony is going through. When I did my dissertation defense in the late 90s, somebody said, "What could you expect to get from a study of a single species on one island?" And also I actually left my graduate program at one point because I was up for an award, up for a grant, and they said, "Oh no, we have somebody studying North Pacific seabird distributions. It's a broad study. You're on one island studying one species. We don't really want to fund that sort of thing," which is why I put this question in Comic Sans for the top. And so what I would say now is that we have been monitoring the status of the entire Western Arctic population of Manx Black Guillemots, a major indicator for the sea ice ecosystem, and the entire western population of Manx Black Guillemots is likely in a precipitous decline, indicating major ecosystem disruption. And that's what you can find out by studying one species on one island for 47 years. And now I'd like to have Katie Morrison talk.
Thanks for that introduction to the study, George. Maria and I are going to tell some stories from our trip in 2019 to Cooper Island and talk a little bit about our outreach efforts through education and through art. And I'll start a little bit with the education part. So I start with this photo that I just love that Joe McNally took of George, surrounded by thousands of data points, all neatly recorded numbers in black and yellow books. I've just enjoyed working with George so much, and now with Maria, to take that volume of data along with George's experiences on Cooper Island and translate it for outreach. I'm the science teacher at an elementary school here in Seattle, UCDS. It's an independent school with about 350 students located in the University District. And I'm excited to share with you how George's work has influenced science curriculum at my school over the years, as well as schools across the country. And I do have a former student here in the audience, so glad to see. Oh, and that's not that person. Another person cheering. Great. So one of the foundations of our school, UCDS, is that we have a thematic emergent curriculum, which means that teachers are designing learning opportunities for students, and that those learning opportunities are changing from year to year. The curriculum is really skill and process-based and gets anchored in a school-wide concept each year. For example, in science, students, of course, are always building those really important science practice skills, but the content and the projects and experiments that those skills get wrapped up in really changes from year to year. And teachers are always looking for an opportunity to create curriculum around. George is one of those opportunities. So I first connected with George a long time ago now, in 2006, and he came to speak with a group of second and third graders at my school who were studying birds. In this photo here, taken in my science lab, you can see George answering questions after a talk from a group of very enthusiastic students. His story really does appeal to people of all ages. He has shared his work several times with my students at UCDS, as well as with students across the country. Over the years, George's work has inspired the development of a number of different science curricula. Time in the field with George that I got to have, as well as working with him on his outreach efforts, has led to student experiences in understanding guillemot biology, simulating techniques used in the field, practicing authentic data analysis, and learning about climate change, both in a specific and in a broader context. The Cooper Island study has inspired classroom teachers at my school to connect their core academic curriculum to it through math prompts like designing nest sites or analyzing data and graphs or building sort of coordinate grids and mapping out Cooper Island. Nonfiction readings and taking presentation notes also have helped students build literacy skills. In just the next few slides, I'll share some photos of students and student work. So I've created opportunities for students to try out the tools of the field biologist. By examining the parts and how they work, students really can build an understanding of the structure and function of each tool. In these photos, students are examining and practicing using calipers to measure eggs and model guillemots. We've used spring scales to collect sort of weights of different things, simulating chicks as they grow. And then on the right, students are looking at all the parts of the Reconyx cameras. Students love experimenting with real tools, and this really sort of grounds them in that work. George collects a lot of data, and his database is the perfect opportunity for an authentic science experience for students. Here, a student has graphed and analyzed chick weight data following the 2019 field season. In another authentic experience, sort of in this same study, students explored Reconyx camera images and videos to take a look at the prey that parents were bringing back to the chicks in the nest boxes. Some of the videos and data had not been tabbed through before, and one group happened on a really surprising image of a polar bear staring right back at the camera. These experiences really generate excitement and investment by students. All right, now this is a really fun activity. So in 2012, George and I were invited to attend a workshop in Utqiagvik, Alaska, that was hosted by Polar Trek and Arcus, bringing scientists, Inuit members, and educators together to develop curriculum around Arctic research and culture. George and I, along with a kindergarten teacher from the North Slope of Alaska, developed a lesson plan simulating the foraging of fish by black guillemots. In this activity, students run back and forth collecting fish for the chicks in their nests. In each round, the ice edge moves farther away, and students collect data on how this affects how many cods the parents can bring back to the nest. So for example, they might say, 50 years ago, the ice edge was if they're on the baseline at the free throw line, and they run back and forth, how many fish can they collect in 30 seconds, or in 30 seconds or a minute, and then the ice edge moves to the half-court line. Then it moves all the way to the other baseline, and students are running back and forth. One kindergarten student, after this activity, reflected, "I noticed that the farther away the ice got, the less fish we collected. We also slowed down a lot. We had less energy because we were running so far. Your energy runs out. The black guillemots might be running out of energy too." This lesson was broadly shared among educators across the country and remains a popular and engaging way to simulate the impacts of a melting Arctic on the ecosystem. The lesson is embedded in a student understanding of black guillemot biology and life cycle, as well as how the guillemot fits into the Arctic ecosystem. Opportunities like the workshop that we attended, giving scientists and teachers a chance to connect, are so important for science education. And some of you may have tried this activity. So this banding activity was initially developed as an engagement for a Friends of Cooper Island annual update. In science class, students select a card with information about a real bird and then learn about its history on Cooper. They then create a bracelet with the same color band combination that the guillemot wears for identification. Since multiple generations often breed on Cooper Island, students really enjoy finding out which other birds they are connected or related to. It really illustrates the complexity and the connectedness of the study species. The Cooper Island study is a powerful anchor for teaching about the effects of climate change. Centering curriculum on authentic science examples really results in greater student understanding and investment in learning. I can remember really feeling the weight of this student's note taken during George's 2006 talk. The student had drawn these sort of concentric circles, sort of showing the shrinking of the ice, and then made that note, the ice might be gone in my lifetime. At that time, the loss of the pack ice in our lifetime seemed like a distant possibility. But now, 16 years later, that has become much more of a reality. In our work with students, we include opportunities for them to explore how they can contribute and help to slow climate change. It can be tricky to balance the seriousness of the situation while providing inspiration and hope for the next generation. So in this next part, we're going to talk about sort of going from STEM to STEAM and the collaboration with Maria. And over the years, Maria Coryell-Martin has done several workshops with students at UCDS. And I've been so inspired by her art as well as her work with students. For several years, I just could not stop thinking about telling George's Cooper Island story through Maria's art. We were both so excited about the possibilities and started planning possible projects that could come out of a collaboration like this. Of course, they all necessitated Maria and I joining George on Cooper Island.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, George. So nice to be here with you all. And those of you who I haven't gotten the chance to meet, my name is Maria Coryell-Martin, and I'm an expeditionary artist. I'd like to tease, it's nice to make up your own job title. I grew up in Seattle. I'm based now in Port Townsend. As an expeditionary artist, I've painted around the world with a focus on polar and glaciated regions, and I'm especially passionate about collaborating with scientists to help support their outreach and education. And with art, I believe in art as a tool versus a talent, a tool for exploration, observation, and sparking scientific inquiry. And then, of course, there's so much more. So I'd come across George's work in the Seattle conservation community, and after scheming with Katie, I thought, wow, there's real potential here for a terrific project. And George graciously agreed to work with us, and our project Witnessing Climate Change began with the idea of the vision of exploring atmospheric, biological, and personal impacts of climate change through the lens of Cooper Island. So this is how Katie and I found ourselves en route to Alaska in 2019, carrying our enormous bags of gear and, of course, extra supplies and treats for George. If you're going to visit someone alone on a desert island, you'd better bring them something good. So for me, as soon as I leave my house on any expedition, the sketching begins. And here's some of my very first done in the airport and on the airplane. And I work with ink and watercolor. I brought some of my art kits you can see over there on the far tables, where I've got ink and watercolor, all very portable, and then some larger materials for bigger sheets and field paintings. And one of the first paintings I completed in Utqiagvik is this iconic whalebone arch that represents Utqiagvik's connection to the sea. With a population of nearly 5,000 people, there's this really rich subsistent tradition of harvesting marine mammals. While briefly in Utqiagvik, we had opportunity to explore the town a little bit, and special thanks to Craig George for taking us around. And already we could begin to see the impacts of climate change there, especially around coastal erosion and the lack of sea ice. In that far photo, you can see us getting ready to get on our boat to go visit George, and our very first view of a polar bear, which thankfully they kept at a distance. We arrived on the island and met up with George. We're happy to see him, and our visit also coincided with the timing of a French data modeler, Pierre Lou, who was up that summer to help assist as well. So in the field, I think about developing my palette of place, a vocabulary of color, climate, and experiences. I paint as much as possible. I use color notes, sketches, working to experience the whole landscape. And then, of course, I try and be useful, schlepping heavy gear when possible, helping in the kitchen, and rapidly got to know the daily rounds of George's nest checks. We'd help with the routine, monitoring eggs, the chicks, and tagging birds. no matter the weather, and really came to appreciate the process that George goes through to gather the data, seeing what's behind it, every egg and every chick. I especially love tools and the different tools that George uses, from the Reconyx cameras to see where we could positioned right in front of the nest boxes there to see what the parents were coming, and then of course sometimes other visitors. Thankfully these bears came a few weeks after our visit. Sorry, George. In 2019. All this just gave me so much an appreciation for the scope of George's research and the environment that he works in. Here's one of my first sketches of camp, taking advantage of some good weather. And I love trying to find the subtle colors and these big skies, the big dramatic skies. And of course, finally seeing the Black Guillemots was thrilling. And here I tried to capture the extent of the panoramic landscape and the Arctic light. Exploring the guillemots by the pond, I sat here and completed these sketches for a number of an hour or so. And it gave me the chance also to reflect on George's time there, just the nearly half decade of research on these little individual birds. Now in the field, my studio space ranges from outside anywhere and also inside the tent, with time to be comfortable. And Katie was a very patient tent mate with some of the things I sketched in our tent. And I was also constantly trying to collect multimedia recordings, some of those time lapses that you saw, videos. And George was very patient with interviews and sharing stories of his experiences and giving some more context for Cooper Island. So I'm going to let Katie come up now and share some of our tools for research and some stories around that.
Thanks, Maria. As part of our project, we really wanted to share the tools that George uses to collect all of that data. And like I said, there's just such beauty and precision and utility in each of those tools. Maria spent hours in the tent creating this painting, this quite large painting of George's tools. You can see spring scales, calipers, the bands, and tools used for banding the birds, for identifying them. We were both really glad, though, when she finished painting that red chick weighing bag that was really smelly, as you can imagine, from lots of chick action there in that bag. So that was one of maybe the first to get completed so it could leave the tent. We also wanted to immerse ourselves in George's process for monitoring the colony. And these are just taken from Maria's little sketchbook. So wherever we went, Maria was, if she wasn't doing a larger sort of field painting, she was doing these smaller sketches. And each day we had this routine of nest checks, camp chores, and other scientific endeavors. We helped wherever we could, and we got to experience some of the challenges of field work. Maria was sketching and painting to capture this process and the birds and the landscape. Here she captures some of these routines and records notes like, we always carry polar bear protection, and sort of each step of carefully checking the nests for the eggs and the chicks. I love her note where it says, rain, wind, or sun, data must be collected, and this is true. We got pretty lucky in our stay, but I think this past summer was much rainier than our visit. As illustrated also, Maria shows us waiting patiently to catch and band birds that were new to the colony. Each day, we checked every nest site to see if there were any newly laid or hatched eggs. For nest boxes that had chicks, we weighed every chick each day and recorded the weight. We were rooting for every chick each time we checked the weight. George will remember us. Fingers crossed, did it gain weight? Experiencing real emotional highs and lows with the fluctuating chick weights. We also looked for any sculpin in the nest boxes that the chicks might have rejected. We got to know the camp really well and tried to help out with any camp maintenance. You can see in Maria's field painting here, the camp consists of a cabin and 2 tents. Maria and I stayed in a tent called the Arctic Oven. It was roomy and toasty, and we were so comfortable in our little home away from home. We would all have meals in the small cabin with George, and if you're wondering, George is a great cook, so we ate so well during our visit. And we would be sort of in and out of the cabin to warm up and visit, and after chatting for a while and hearing stories, you can imagine 47 years on an island, there are lots of great stories, so much history, so we'd have lots of stories, but then we would get cold from sitting in the cabin, so then it would be time to go out and walk around in the colony and do some work, and then when you got cold in the colony, you would come back to the cabin for some tea. So it was a lot of back and forth. The cabin was really our main base. Here, Maria captures some of the sort of outside tools. George has a wind generator, there's a windsock, solar panels, and you can see this, she's sort of documented this impending storm heading towards camp. We knew this storm was coming the day before that it came, so Maria and I were worried. Our tent was a bit noisy, sort of some flapping with the wind. It's always a bit windy, so we were worried, so we restaked our tent that night, really tight, but we made the rookie mistake of making it too tight. So in the middle of the night, Maria and I woke up to this really loud flapping. We went out to fix it, and it was just huge winds and sideways rain, and the vestibule had come undone and started waving wildly and ripping off of the tent. We were in a panic, so we banged on the cabin door and woke George up in the middle of the night. I say night, but, Arctic, it was luckily not dark out. We were soaked through, freezing, and pretty scared, honestly. George is so used to this kind of weather, he had slept right through this storm. But he had us in, warmed us up, and calmed us down. So here I show a little video taken the evening as the winds were building. And you can see the winds getting worse. And then in the other photo, in sort of Winnie the Pooh style, I am trying to climb back into the tent through the collapsed vestibule. The next morning, the tent was filled with sand, and I've got myself laughing so hard that it took a while to get back into the tent because I was laughing so hard. Luckily, Maria snapped a picture so that we could capture it. And then in this last slide here, I'm just, it's like calm day. I'm very relieved that we didn't blow away, all our things didn't blow away. And then Maria just sewed that tent right up, as good as new. We came home from the field and really got to work processing all of the information that we had gathered on Cooper Island. Our first iteration of this collaboration was to present at the Pacific Science Center's Curiosity Days. This occurred in late February and early March of 2020. Maria and I put together displays of her art and George's tools. We made posters describing the guillemots and the study. Visitors got to choose a bird and band themselves. And afterwards, we just felt so lucky because it was just right before everything, the pandemic hit and closed down everything for months.
So while we were on that pandemic pause, an exhibition that we'd planned was also paused at the Jefferson Museum in Port Townsend. And after a full year delay, we were able to go through with plans, and I was busy in my studio developing work for this exhibit, which was going to include field sketches, studio paintings, tools, multimedia displays, and some installations. So here's the flip side to my work in the field is in my studio. And here's a peek behind the scenes. The egg sketch, let's see here, the one, the top middle one, was completed in the field, studying the eggs right there in the nest box. George said, okay, here's one you can take a look at and not disturb much. So after a couple hours there developing that sketch, I brought that back to my studio, and it was the inspiration for a studio study, a little 5x5 painting. And I love working small first in my studio to explore composition, color, and technique before working larger. I knew I wanted to go big with this one. The final painting is a full 40 inches wide because eggs are such a focal point for George's research. Here's another example from the field to the studio of George's camp. I've got the original field sketch over on the table there if you'd like to see it. But that first sketch became the inspiration for a painting that I did in my studio, again, that 5x5 study. And I knew that I was drawn artistically to just that big atmosphere and the sky and the light. And then I wanted to go big, and that larger piece is a full sheet watercolor paper, 22 by 30. Now, George is a scientist, and I think he sometimes, I've heard him describe Cooper Island as a parking lot, and earlier, compared to the strewn luggage. But at times, he can be quite poetic. And I loved this description of the Cooper Island. George told me, Cooper Island has no vertical or emotional relief. You can see 6 miles to the horizon. It makes it easy to focus on the birds here. There's not much else to distract you. There's the colony and the 180 degrees of the whole skyscape. And reflecting on that skyscape became one of the focal points for my work as well, and thinking about the atmosphere and the sheer magnitude of his data. And Katie and I, in working on this exhibition, began thinking about, hey, what are the ways we can visualize this data to include in our exhibition and our catalog? And this is one of the pieces that we came up with. And it took a lot of phone calls with George and brainstorming and sketching. But I came up with the idea to illustrate an installation of 46 cards, each card representing a year, 46 total at the time. And I'll have to do some more. And I wanted each card to represent 3 components: the atmospheric, biological, and personal. And so for the atmosphere, I had some inspiration from data modeler Zachary Labe in Colorado in looking at color to help represent above or below average temperatures for each year, ranging with blue as the coldest, temperatures up to 2 degrees below average, to the deepest red as the hottest, up to 2 degrees above average. And so you can really see the transition here in these years from the cooler years to warmer, with year 2000 really marking some of that transition. So next, I wanted to include the biologic data and work directly from the eggs, thinking about, okay, total eggs laid, and then eggs hatched and fledged. And so I came up, it might be a little hard to see on that slide there, but the white eggs were the ones fledged. The half white, half black were hatched, but the chicks died. And then the black eggs never hatched. And then for some of those personal stories, I included small pictures for certain events and years, and also some notes at the bottom of the cards. And so you can see when the cabin was first brought in, a polar bear might show a year when the polar bears had a bigger impact on the colony, or the foxes, or the puffins. So all in all, wanting to help show in a visual that people could experience right there the scope of George's 46 years of research. This is another illustration that we created for our catalog to help show the scope, with over 10,000 eggs on that left-hand side. And thinking about, with those 10,000 eggs, George handled chicks 100,000 times. Well, now probably 100,000 times, George. At the time of the catalog, they're 97,000, but we can round that up. And it inspired a set of tubes that's over there on the table if you'd like to see them, helping show visually with small beads those numbers of eggs and chicks and fledglings. Our exhibit at the Jefferson Museum was from August through December of 2021 and received over 3,000 visitors in person, with additional workshops and radio interviews and newspaper features. And Katie and I are so proud to help share the story of George's remarkable long-term research. And we hope that our work, ranging from the field to the studio and classroom, can come together to move and inspire you, creating conversations and actions. And we want to truly thank everyone here for making this possible, from George to all the supporters along the way of this journey. Thank you.
That's really, I mean, I really want to go to Cooper Island based on that. You know what I mean? which is how I felt in Port Townsend, because I was listening to them and I said, like, yes, they captured the enthusiasm, and they captured much more than that. And having them out there in 2019 was just so good, and they just showed you why it was so good. So yes, so thank you. I mean, following that, I mean, that's a tough act to follow. I just want to go through one more thing that I found that is engaging me greatly recently. The Alaska Marine Science Symposium is held every January, and there was a paper there on the pelagic fish populations in the Chukchi Sea, and it included a lead statement that age 0 Arctic cod, and age 0 Arctic cod are very small, that they have dominated the pelagic ecosystem, and that there are very few adults. And they cite, and actually because I commented on this, I actually have recently reviewed a paper submitted on this, that they cite that there was a cruise in 1970 that found only very young cod. And that was historically the only thing they could cite. It turns out that they overlooked a number of things. It turns out, and this is why you don't have a shifting baseline if you have somebody who's 75 years old who went up to the Arctic in 1970. But they said that Jay Quast found only young Arctic cod. Now, and what they then show is basically, historically, there were only very young cod there, and then what they're basically showing here is that pollock are now coming up. But I knew that there were adult cod because I had been on that icebreaker with Jay Quast. We saw adult cod being thrown up on the ice. There were large numbers of birds gathering there. I was at the Smithsonian. We were collecting birds, and we were looking at stomach samples. They were all the birds were eating Arctic cod, and they were eating adult Arctic cod. And George Watson and I, and this was my introduction to the Arctic in the fall cruise in 1970, I can recall Jay Quast coming back and saying, I don't know why we're not catching any of the adults. So I actually, in my review, said, Jay Quast was very confused as to why his sampling technique was so bad. So basically, you weren't seeing the adult cod because Jay Quast didn't. And what we know is that black guillemots eat adult cod. I mean, anything that is around 15 centimeters, around 6 inches long, is an adult Arctic cod. That's what the birds bring back on Cooper Island. That's what they eat in the Chukchi Sea. It turns out, and as a result of trying to show how many cod there had to be in the Chukchi Sea, just to disprove this thing about the juveniles, I figured out that it would take roughly almost 1,500 Arctic cod for a pair to raise 2 chicks, and these have to be 150 millimeters. If you get smaller than that, the energy density drops greatly, and birds would have to be bringing back far more fish than they could possibly do in their 1 trip per hour. So I realized that Cooper Island, when it was at its peak with roughly 200 pairs raising young, that there were a huge number of Arctic cod within 5 kilometers of Cooper Island. And I started thinking about, and I have used the phrase that black guillemots are repackaged Arctic cod. I really started thinking about what this meant, but how many Arctic cod had to be around for them. Now, I know that the Chukchi ice and the change in the Cooper Island population are very well correlated, and that what this means is that Arctic cod are becoming less available and almost certainly less abundant. But what has happened is, if you can see that block there, this is where the fisheries people are sampling. They started sampling up there in 2010 because nobody cared about the Arctic because there weren't any commercial fish up there. And the only thing sampling Arctic cod populations in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and basically the first decade of the 20th century were black guillemots. And the only person who was really watching them was me. So again, I mean, looking at the two things about how things have changed at Cooper and Harold, they came in. All these fisheries people came in when the party was well over. This is 20 years after the 1990 shift that things started going downhill on Cooper, and they have no idea of that. Well, they do now, and I'm sure the editor told them too when I did the review, is that, wait a minute, no, this cryopelagic system has been crashing since 1990, and you went out and sampled it at the end of the party when probably the adult cod are not present, which is why the Cooper Island colony and the Harold Island colonies are going downhill. So if the same person were to ask me again, what could you expect to get from a study of a single species on one island, I'd say, we have monitored the status of Arctic cod, the primary forage fish in the Arctic, for the last half century, and that the Western Arctic population of Arctic cod is likely not able to support the populations of marine predators that they did in the past, and this includes seals and seabirds. So this is the thing about being on a 4-mile strip of sand and gravel and studying an apex predator in detail, that it can tell you. And now, I mean, surprisingly, people are going like, oh yeah, I mean, they like basically have to believe the data because I didn't make up the 200 pairs breeding there in 220. So anyway, I now want to thank all the people who have encouraged and have provided kindness for my work over the years. When I'm in the cabin, there aren't many voices there except the voices in my head, and one of them frequently says, "What are you doing here? Why don't you go home?" But very early on, when I still had a tent, there was someone on KBRW radio who I listened to for 3 months. I then went back into town, went into the Mexican restaurant in town, heard the same voice after hearing it on the radio, went up to him and I said, "Are you Earl Finkler?" And he said, "Yes." And I started telling him about jokes he had said in mid-June, and this was early September, because I hadn't talked to anybody. And he turned to his then, I think maybe fiancé at best, Chris, and said, "I don't know this man." And I think they were thinking, wait a minute, is this a crazy stalker? Because how would he know all these things? And I said, oh, by the way, it's so great when you play It's a Beautiful Morning, because I will then walk around the rest of the day thinking about that. I told Art Howard, who was out there for NSF during the International Polar Year, about Earl. And unfortunately, Earl passed away in the past 2 weeks or so. But I wanted to mention that. And this was...
Good morning. It is a beautiful morning. Pretty good visibility. Cloudy, 40 degrees. Winds east-northeast at 7. Hi, I'm Earl Finkler. It's 7 a.m. Avu at home sleeping, as is noon, I imagine. Today's Friday.
Earl was a great person. He was also a journalist, and he did a great deal for Cooper Island outreach. He wrote articles for the Anchorage papers. He did things on Alaska Public Radio, and beyond that, he was just a great friend and a really good person. In terms of voices in the cabin, I don't know if you remember the 1988 miracle with the whales that were trapped. 1988 was a bad year in terms of freeze-up because it was the one year that the chicks got caught because of a snowstorm on Cooper Island. So lots of stuff was stuck up there, and there was and the two people played a major role in making that known. Craig George and Geoff Carroll. When they made the movie, they realized they couldn't have these two characters be part of the movie because they couldn't find anyone in Hollywood that was as good looking as either of them. But ever since the early 80s or so, Craig George has been the voice in the cabin because he will talk to me on the VHF radio. I come through town, and he doesn't say, "What, are you up here for one more year, or why are you doing this?" He understands completely, because Craig fell in love with the Arctic and fell in love with one species 30, 40 decades ago, and understands totally what I'm doing. And so like Geoff and Craig have come out to the island frequently and visited me, and Sid, who is Craig's wife, Craig and Sid happen to be here tonight, which is just amazing. And if you, We are both idiosyncratic scientists. He is a more serious scientist than I am, but we both are rather comical at times. And one of the things that Craig did, and if you don't know why the North Slope Borough, well, basically the North Slope Borough was formed the same year I founded the Cooper Island Colony in 1972, but then they realized that NOAA and other federal agencies might try to stop them from harvesting bowhead whales. So they hired some very competent researchers who could go out on the ice and count whales and work on them and have their wildlife management department say, we have good data on bowhead whales. We know that if we harvest this amount, things aren't going to change. So Craig, who's out there counting whales in that picture, has gone out on the ice many, many years and just recently retired as much as you can if you're still living in Utqiagvik and bowhead whales are going by like that. Craig his voice has actually been in the island, and I like to think the caption of this photo is like, George, you have to go back to town at some point, because he seems very serious about something. But again, it's like Craig is here at the 40th anniversary, or the 40th, the 40th anniversary in Utqiagvik, Alaska. And Craig and I share very similar senses of humor to the point where there are people who won't let us talk together at parties because they go, no, keep them away from each other. Because Craig, there were people who would listen to the VHF radio because we had a regular check-in time, because we would do things like, Craig would say, how do you copy me? And I said, I didn't realize I was copying you. Have I been copying you too much? And then he said, no, I think you were tracing rather than copying. And then it just goes on like that. We just make up things, and people were amused. I should mention, it is very important to mention that this study would not be possible if there was not the largest Inuit community in the world, 30 miles west of Cooper Island. They have done everything to help me keep it. And Billy Adams has been a friend for like many decades. He's a great hunter and gets out there. He is the real, as Craig says, he is the real deal. Just recently, and Billy has come out and helped me board up the cabin at the end of the summer and taken me back. And this photo, Billy sent this 2 days ago. You can see the date on it. This is the Cooper Island cabin, 3 days ago now? He happened to be flying into town, and that's what it looks like on Cooper Island right now. And actually, I was glad to see that no bear had broken in this year, as it happened in the past, and that the snow is building up so that I have drinking water in June, because that's what I have to use now for drinking water, because the multi-year ice isn't present. Billy is also great at taking pictures of the black guillemots in winter plumage when they're north of the point. So I get great information about the molt progression and the occurrence of them there. In terms of voices at the cabin in 2020, when I was really thinking about swimming back to Barrow because things were back to Utqiagvik because things were so bad, a sailboat went by, the Terra Nova, that was trying to get through the Northwest Passage. And Matt Lance is here tonight because he's a Seattle resident who is going to be trying again in 2023. And again, just how things happen, Craig went down and because basically in 2020, when Terra Nova went up on the beach or pulled up to the beach, somebody ran down and said, no, you can't come in because of, of the quarantine and stuff. Craig went down and dealt with all those issues. So we are, and actually in 2020, as I was talking to Terra Nova, they were coming back after having been turned back by Canada. They said, hey, do you want us to pick you up? Which I thought was just, anyone who will take me off Cooper when things are bad. And he said, I don't know how close we can get because of the keel. And I thought, I'd be willing to maybe swim 20 or 30 yards. If you can get that close, because things were that bad. I also want to mention someone else who's here tonight, Ken Fabert, who went up in 2019 with me after a bear broke into the cabin, and there was a major snowdrift that search and rescue saw, and Ken and others helped me shovel it out and board up the cabin. And then he came back later in 2019 after Katie and Maria were there and brought his daughter Emma, and they wrote a very nice article about climate change in Arctic Alaska, including the work on Cooper Island. I wanted to briefly mention the two voices that haven't been, well, Cole Joyer was up there last year and is coming up again this year, and he is so good. He likes it so much that I would get back on days that I thought were bad, and he goes, it's not that bad. And one of the reasons I hired him is I put out a thing saying I want to hire someone for 2 to 3 weeks to help me either at the start or end of the summer, and he said, well, I could come out in August. And I said, well, when in August? He said, well, I'm getting married on August 6th. I could probably come out on August 9th. And I said, you're my man, because that would be something I would do. And actually, and Aymeric Vermont is a French researcher who's been working with geolocator data, which we now have a good data set on, and he's going to be coming on board in the next few weeks or so. And actually, I talked to him on Skype recently, and he mentioned that he flew out to his girlfriend's field research site and asked his boss if he could just fly out on the food resupply. As they were taking off the food, he got down on his knee and proposed to his girlfriend while the helicopter was still going. And I said this, yes, there isn't room for 3 romantic guys on Cooper Island. But hopefully there are, and they're just excellent workers. So I don't want to go much about the canary in the coal mine thing, but people will say, have you been studying the canary in the coal mine? And they are not the canary in the coal mine. Because if you wanted to figure out the status of a canary, you did not have to do 5 decades of research in an isolated field location. You didn't have to band all the fledglings and all the breeding adults for 45 years. You didn't have to deploy electronic data loggers and other things to monitor the canary movements and activities, or do major data processing, modeling, and other analyses to determine the probability that the canary was dead. Which is what modelers do. And my alternative, and this was something I gave a talk about on this to a seabird group recently and got some good comments, because seabird people will say, oh yeah, it's a canary in the coal mine. I say, don't say that. That's what the media will just grab as a catchphrase. Say, my research shows that my study species is responding to the effects of humanity's reliance on fossil fuel and the global warming caused by fossil fuel emissions. Society's inability to address this issue will result in major degradation of all of the Earth's ecosystems, including the one supporting my study species. And just have that. So if the media comes up to you and says, well, is this a canary in the coal mine? Say, no, it's actually this. So, yeah. Anyway, so that leads me to what the French modelers are saying, and they are saying that the colony has a high chance of what's called quasi-extinction, which is kind of like being a little bit pregnant, I think. It isn't extinct, but it's being down to numbers that you think the number of individuals there would not be able to reproduce successfully, or if they did, the diversity in genetics would be so low. And that would be true for many highly colonial seabirds, but Black Guillemots can breed as individual pairs, and frequently do. I mean, there are pigeon guillemots breeding under the Edgewater Hotel right now as individual pairs. They don't have to have a large colony. I mean, they're like humans. It takes a male and a female to breed successfully. It doesn't take like 10,000 murs like it does for murs. So what is likely going to happen to the Cooper Island colony, and you saw the trajectory and how it's going down, is that there's going to be a bottleneck. And clearly the bottleneck is occurring now. We can see that certain birds are able to get through this. We've had older birds that are able to handle a wide range of things being rather successful. And to the extent that something happens, like a subarctic fish comes up there and things like that, these birds will be in a good position to then breed there at the colony. One of the best things about looking at the canary in the coal mine analogy was finding this image. Someone realized that, okay, as soon as the canary starts to falter, rather than just watching it die, what if we had a thing where we could close up the glass windows around it and have an oxygen tank on top and give the canary oxygen? Which I realize is kind of what we did with the nest cases, because if we hadn't done that with the nest cases, the polar bears would have wiped out. But it is that sort of thing that humans do because there's hope, and because they care about canaries, and because we care about guillemots. So, in terms of hope, I am really looking forward to seeing you here next year. But we are looking forward to Cooper 2025. it's going to be an unprecedented thing. And if all the people who said they will come out for the 50th, including Joe McNally, who's going to make a movie, it's going to be really crowded out there. But it is going to be an unprecedented thing, and we will keep going in terms of this colony getting smaller and smaller to see what happens to at least 2025. One of the problems is that the colony is now so small, I can wake up in the morning and do the nest checks before breakfast, and then I have to figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of the time. So I do want to acknowledge, and this isn't one of these standard land acknowledgments things, that like I am occupying and working on the unceded land of the Inupiat who called Cooper Island Igloo Rock, and I've talked with them about changing the references to the island to Igloo Rock, and people have said, "Oh no, it's Cooper Island." I mean, they've basically gotten used to it, but they had the same sort of thing with Barrow and Utqiagvik, going back and forth with that. But people who work at the Bureau, both Search and Rescue and Wildlife, have been critical for maintaining this. And the funding we've received from both the French through their Sensei project and the North Pacific Research Board is letting us take this to the next level, as I mentioned. So I really want to thank Katie Morrison, who's here in front of one of Craig George's bowhead whale skulls. Katie, I mean, I can't tell you. Just how great it is that I can text her from the island and say, could you look into this? Could you do that? But mostly who I have to text saying, can you do that, is Catherine Smith. I had a chance to study tropical seabirds in 1970 when I went to the Arctic. Catherine has never forgiven me for not doing that. She's also never forgiven me for getting tied into Black Guillemots versus donkeys, because she loves donkeys. But she has been, for the past 22 years, the most supportive girlfriend I could have imagined, and now I'm hoping that she'll be as supportive wife going forward.
Thank you, George. Before we take questions, I'll just close with first saying thank you all for coming, for looking north, for talking about this important topic. I'm so honored to get to be part of this work with George, and Maria and I have just been so inspired by his project as a way to inform people and the next generation about climate change through art and education. We are in the process of expanding our outreach efforts. We are an all-volunteer nonprofit, and every dollar donated goes directly to fund both the research and the outreach. For many years, Friends of Cooper Island has been supported by donations from many of you, people who are concerned about the impacts of a melting Arctic. You can donate by check or PayPal, either here tonight if you're here in person or directly through our website. If you're here tonight and you donate $100, you can have your choice of taking home a catalog, really showcasing so many of Maria's paintings and the stories about George, or a set of note cards featuring Maria's paintings. And we just thank you so much for considering supporting this important cause. And now we'll take a few questions. And I think if you have a question in the audience, there's a mic up here at the front. And also Brad is monitoring the chat for us to take any online questions.
There are a couple of them. One of them is, could you go to Wrangell or Herald Islands to see if your banded birds might have moved there?
He ain't climbing those cliffs.
In 1998, I was on a Greenpeace cruise from Utqiagvik over to Wrangell and Herald. Actually, I was on Wrangell briefly, and we circled Herald, and it was rather late in the year, and there were lots of black guillemots there, though it was certainly too late in the season. So I was looking at every tarsus for every bird. And again, if you can deal with the analogy, it would be like trying to go through the city of Seattle and seeing who's wearing a Kingston sweatshirt, a Kingston, it's like, yes, they may be there, But again, it doesn't seem. I mean, given the number of birds that we have that have fled from Cooper and have returned to there, we aren't losing many to like some other place, which is very interesting. Yeah.
The only other question, since nobody else has come up here, is basically, have they stopped letting icebreakers into the Arctic?
Have they started?
Have they stopped letting icebreakers break up ice in the Arctic?
Oh,
given
no.
the situation?
No, I've seen that where people say, if you're a climate change researcher who goes out on an icebreaker, say, well, I know why the ice is melting. It's because those icebreakers that are going there. Icebreakers can still, and also now icebreakers don't even have to break much, hinging on when they go. And because, one of the important things, and of course there's so much I couldn't talk about tonight, but like ice thinning has been a major component of what's going on. When people look at ice volume, it's one thing to look at ice extent, but ice volume has decreased greatly. In the past, there were roughly 4 feet of ice in the winter right off Cooper. It's now much less of that, and that is bound to change the feeding habitat for Arctic cod. So if there aren't any more.
I have a question. Have you seen any subarctic prey fish that you, in the last couple of years, come up that you haven't seen before?
No, not really. There are sand lance and there are capelin, which are more subarctic, which are subarctic, but they've always been in the area. Guillemots aren't turning to them, even though some of the fish people who have done there, and I have an issue with people talking about fisheries, because fishery means that you're talking about a stock, which means you're thinking about selling it, as opposed to a fish population. But there are other species in Arctic cod that the guillemots aren't taking, and I don't know whether they're not good at feeding in the water column, because they basically went from feeding like under the ice to then feeding on the bottom, and maybe they aren't able to do that. But what we're waiting for is for sand lance, capelin, and even pollock or saffron cod to get to be abundant enough that they start coming in when the parents are provisioning chicks. Yes, Craig. This is Craig George. This could get to be an absurd conversation.
Well, I'll try to be coherent. No. So, it occurred to me in one of your slides that one of the southernmost colonies is Cape Thompson, which is several hundred miles south, and clearly that goes ice-free in summer. So, how are those birds making it? Or is that colony also failing?
That colony hasn't been. And the thing is, that little graph I showed you, where we looked at the threshold with the ice concentration and the sea surface temperature, we've done that for all the colonies, including Cape Thompson. Probably in the past, maybe in the not so distant past, Cape Thompson and Lisburn, which is just north. Lisburn is just north of Thompson, had lots of guillemots. But certainly Lisburn is just in the period from the late 70s censusing that took place to the most recent censusing. It used to have 250 pairs, and now it's down to 20 pairs or so. So I think there probably are some remnant. Thompson never had more than 10 pairs, and also Thompson is so subarctic. It also had pigeon guillemots breeding there too.
Does it really?
Yeah, it did. Yeah. No, it was one of these places where people used to think they might have been the same species, and they said, "Oh, it'd be interesting to see if they're hybridizing." But no, there's like 100-gram difference in weights and things like that. Yes.
You said 2020 was a bad time. In what way was it so bad?
Oh, 2020?
Yeah.
Oh, well,
It was bad everywhere.
What happened in 2020, though it was bad certainly personally for me, one of the things that was really something was that as of, the 1st of June, I thought, I'm not going to ban any fledglings this year. This is going to be the break in the data set because no one is flying anywhere. And then I got this email from Craig and others saying, when you coming up, which meant everything to me. And the Bureau made it so I could get off the plane, get a rapid test. get out to Cooper, take off the mask, and grab the shotgun. But that was one of the issues, is that a polar bear had basically said, okay, I'm going to be living on Cooper for a while, so I had to deal with a polar bear who thought I was in his territory. And then we had the classic thing that's been happening now. Breeding overwinter survival used to be 90%. 90% of the adults bred one year came back and bred the next year. Recently, it's dropped down to 75%. And once you start losing the breeding stock, if you will, then the population is really going to be in trouble. And then the birds that did lay eggs that year didn't do well. So I was dealing with all of the general, and also what was strange about 2020 is usually I'm on the island and I think, oh, things are okay back in Seattle or wherever, because I'm up on the strange place. And listening to the news, I realized every place is a strange place. So when I say it was bad, and also it just was a continuation of this downward trend in the colony without any sign of how things could get better with, as I mentioned, the immigrants now not coming in at all. Well, thanks so much. And, I'm sorry, I can't.
Hey, George, given the elevation of Cooper Island, what does the future look like?
Oh, given the elevation? Well, it's interesting. If you've read about the differences in sea level rise, how sea level rise isn't uniform, and even though the Arctic and the melting of the glaciers on Greenland are really contributing to that, sea level in the Arctic hasn't risen as much as it has elsewhere because the world isn't really round. And I know exactly where the beach is on Cooper because we know where South Beach is because that's where we visit when we need to do bodily functions and things like that. So, and things haven't changed there at all in terms of where the high tide line is. It is true that the island is sinking a bit because of the permafrost melting, and we have in the past had half of the island basically underwater because of large swells coming in because the ice is so far offshore. You can get a much bigger fetch coming in, but it's that isn't a major. Even though it's probably going to happen at some point, I think it'll be interesting to see if there are any guillemots even breeding there at that point when the island goes underwater.
I had one last question about the paints you're using, and it was, how do you keep the paints from freezing? Do you add alcohol to the paint, or what do you do?
Yeah, a little bit of vodka or gin added to a water bottle. Emergency use only. Also, coming back to a nice cozy tent after doing a lot of notes and such can be helpful too. Yeah, thank you.
Which is an important point, is that there are good and bad bottlenecks. and the population bottleneck may not be good for the guillemots, but having a good bottleneck back in the camp can make the end of the day better. So yes.
So George, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Kat. This is my daughter Tess, and Tess is a student with Katie. And Tess's younger brother Pete was also a student there, and they both have had, been touched too by Maria's art. And I just think that as a parent, to have children come home to speak about what's happening because the teachers are putting it in a way that makes them understand it, not so simplistically as a canary in the mine, but something more broad, a greater understanding, something that they can extend to other things that they're learning about, and their own actions, not so simply by a trip that we're taking in the car, but a plane ride that we're taking, or what they're seeing in terms of the traffic in Puget Sound. It has been such a wonderful way for you to share your work and your dedication and the repetitiveness of the practice of seeing this. A lifetime of dedication. I just want to thank you as a parent for bringing folks to show the children and all of their friends such a deeper and more poetic way than a very simple line. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I will be in a few months alone on Cooper Island. wondering about this, and truly, on days like that, I mean, I talked to some people today I talked to someone who'd been to 3 of my talks here, and I came back to hear them again. So, I mean, it means everything to me that this is touching people or informing people in any way. It's been somewhat indulgent of me to basically say, oh, by the way, I'm going north every June, and having done that for basically now over 50 years. What I found out, of course, I never thought I was going to find out, and again, I don't even know where it's going. But it means everything to me to have people like Katie and Maria helping me tell the story. It's just great.